It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm going to double check and make sure I didn't turn this off by mistake. Look at that, somewhere along the way. We'll try that. Somewhere along the way I put it on hold. It's probably so that you folks didn't have to listen to me sing. It's just God's blessing. I want to tell you about the story in the paper this week. Why it was there this week, not last week.
All right.
Because I wrote it for last week, but I was about 3 hours late getting it into the paper.
Oops.
They're strict.
And so Adam sent me a note. He says, couldn't get it in this week, but that's okay because I think God wants it in next week for Valentine's Day.
Amen. Amen. That was good.
So I thought, isn't that like God that you're 3 hours late because you're 7 days early?
Yes. God does that.
Okay. I was thinking about what to share with you folks tonight. And I got the most impossible answer from God. So I hope you're all comfortable, because he asked me to highlight for you my last 3 sermons. But in reality, what we've been looking at as a church over at our church on Sunday mornings is we've been working our way through the Bible in light of the gospel. And the theme for this month of February has been guardrails. Now on September, I think it was September the 3rd, it was definitely Labor Day Monday, 2013. We were living in Quispamsis, and my son had gone into the city of St. John on the west side for an event. And I remember the night because it was pouring rain. It was pouring rain. And so I left Quispamsis to go get him. I headed in the Mackay Highway. And I came over a little rise, and I discovered the spot where everybody was complaining about. And as I came over that rise, my tires hit a puddle of water. And I went into an amazing spin cycle. And I ended up bouncing I think 3 times off the guardrail before the car came to a stop. Foolish me, I drove the car home and then had to get it towed the next day, and it was a write-off and all that kind of stuff. But I was so glad there was a guardrail, because what waited for me on the other side of the guardrail was a rock wall. Okay? Did you picture it? Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about guardrails tonight, because God brought, some say, as many as 1 million people out of Egypt. He led them by a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of smoke that gave them a little bit of shade from the sun during the day. And he brought them through the Red Sea, and he brought them to Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, he began to give them guardrails to be the godly society that he wanted them to be. And as we talk about this for a few minutes tonight, I want to highlight 3 things, one of which, Spencer, you've already landed on. Every time I come, there's a neat connection between what you've shared and where I'm headed. So that's one of those neat things. I want to draw for you a picture of what happened at Mount Sinai. Now picture this. These people have lived in slavery for generations. Their only connection with Yahweh, God, was a promise that had been given to their ancestors. They had no organized religion. They had a promise. But yet God is bringing them out, and he's going to take them to a promised land, and he's going to have them be a godly society. So he knows that it's pretty easy to go off the rails And so he wanted to give them some guardrails. So he brings them to Mount Sinai. And let me read for you. This is from Exodus chapter 19. There have been 3 days of cleansing. On the morning of the third day, there was a thick thunder and lightning and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. And everyone in the camp trembled. And Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. And Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. Smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. You get the picture? Something big is happening here. And the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. You ever been in one of those places where things were loud and then it just kept getting louder and louder? About the time that I want to back away. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. And this God who had been a reality that had provided Passover protection, this God who had been the smoke and the fire out in front of them, this God who had opened the Red Sea and led them through, now for the first time with these people had an audible voice. And this is what God said to these people. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves any idols in any form of things in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to worship them. For I am the Lord. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commands. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, neither you nor your sons nor your daughters nor your manservants nor your maidservants nor any of your animals nor any aliens within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord created the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live in the land the Lord your God is going to give you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant or his maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And this is the interesting part. Okay, picture yourself. You're at the foot of this mountain, and the voice of God booms out, and he gives you these 10 guardrails for life. And how do you respond? Because this is how these people responded. But when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they were they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said, Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. The people's response was to want to keep God at a distance. Okay? But God had given them some guardrails. And I want to briefly say the guardrails, there were 4 of them that were a vertical dimension. This is how you connect with God. First of all, it's me. God says, it's me, it's not anybody else. It's me. Secondly, don't try to create anything to represent me. What he could have said is, I'm going to show up 1,400 years from now. and you'll see me in flesh and blood. But don't try to create anything to represent me. Then he said, look, be serious about how you use my name. I grew up in northeastern New Brunswick, and in 2 languages. I grew up knowing how to, what I thought was take God's name in vain. And lots of great phrases. Determined not to use them. But the more I've looked at it, the more I've realized that there is a deeper way to take God's name in vain than to use Jesus as a curse. And that is to claim to be one of his people and not live like it.
That's right.
To claim to be his but have no relationship with him is to take God's name in vain. But anyway, God says, remembering the Sabbath day, making time for me in your life, and the New Testament teaches, you can take one day or you can take time every day. Basically, the Sabbath day is 16 hours a week to slow down and focus on your relationship with God.
Thank you.
But God says these are guardrails to maintain that vertical dimension in your life. And then he says there's a horizontal dimension. You're going to live in community together. So, very simple horizontal dimension. Honor your father and mother. Be careful of family relationships. Don't murder, don't lie, don't commit adultery, don't want what's not yours. Vertical dimensions. This is where God began, but then came Jesus. And I want to reflect on these horizontal and vertical guardrails. On the day that Jesus in Matthew chapter 22 was asked, which one of these commandments is the greatest? Okay? You got it very clear. God said vertical relationship with him, horizontal relationship with everybody else. And Jesus asked which is most important. Do you remember what he said? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And you shall love your neighbors as yourself. And on this hangs all. Notice what Jesus did. He took the vertical dimension, the horizontal dimension, and then he made it a 3D project because he focused it inward. He didn't say just have vertical dimension and love God. He said love the Lord your God with all of who you are. Look inside. And then he said, love your neighbor. But what did he say? Mike, how do I have to love you? Oh. Ooh. I gotta look inside and say, do I really accept and love who I am? Jesus took the vertical and the horizontal and he made it 3D because he made us look inward. Why did he make us look inward? I'll get to that in a couple minutes. Because the second message in that guardrail series was what happened next. God took Moses up into the mountain and gave him great instructions for building a tent of meeting, a tabernacle. A portable structure that could move with the people everywhere, but was to be the presence of God put smack dab in the middle of their community. The people were saying, Moses, you go talk to God and leave us over here. God tells Moses, no, I want you to build this tent so that I'm right in the middle. I'm going to put 3 tribes on the north, 3 tribes on the south, 3 tribes on the east, 3 tribes on the west. And he gives them instructions for this tabernacle. Now, let me just illustrate quickly what this tabernacle would be like. Let's say we were in the tabernacle, and there's a big curtain here, Holy of Holies. And unless, as the representative of God, I am fully bathed and fully dressed properly and give the right sacrifices, I'm dead if I go in here. But there's an Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, the place where the 10 Commandments were. And more importantly than that, the place where the glory of God the Father rested on top. Not in any of the fixtures of it, but in the smoke and haze that sat on top. Because God said, don't make any idols. No material thing that represents me. So it's just here in the smoke and haze, my glory. And there's a curtain. And then you go out. So that's on the west side. You go out, and over here on the north side, there's a table. And on that table is the bread that represents God's blessing in the wilderness. Okay? You go over here on this side. Right about where the light is there, folks. There's a candlestick with 7 candles on it that represents God's light. You go back over there on the south side, and there's a doorway. Okay. Those are significant because if you open the Gospel of John, remember the stone 10 commandments back here in the Holy of Holies and the glory of God? The Word became flesh. And we beheld His glory as the only begotten Son of God, full of grace and truth. Jesus is present in the symbols of the tabernacle. Over here is the table with the bread on this side. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Jesus was part of God's plan from the beginning. Over here was the lampstand. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Jesus was present from the beginning in God's plan. Back on the east side is the door. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the door, or I am the gate. Jesus was present from the beginning. But here's what you need to understand about all of this beautiful direction of what this tabernacle looked like and everything. In Exodus 25, verse 8, God says, build this tabernacle because I am their God, and I want to dwell in the midst of them. God's emphasis was not on the structure.
That's right.
It was on His intent to have relationship with His people.
Yes. Amen.
You know, several centuries go by. David moves the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He moves the tabernacle. He builds himself a palace, and then he starts to feel bad. I have this great palace, and God's out there in a tent. So he determines that he's going to do what? Build a temple.
Yes.
Interesting, he asked Nathan, God's prophet, should I do this? Nathan says, go for it. Then God calls Nathan on the carpet.
Yeah.
And he says, you go to David and you tell him that I never asked for a permanent structure. From the time that I brought these people out of Egypt, I have been in a tent to be able to be free to be wherever they are. Because God's emphasis was not on religion or structure, it was on relationship and presence.
Yes.
You move to Jesus, and I think you covered it. I mean, what did Jesus say about the temple? Destroy this temple, and I'll build it again in 3 days. And he wasn't talking about the great building that Herod built. As a matter of fact, Herod didn't even follow God's plan for the building. He built something bigger because he wanted to make the temple great again. Oh, read into that whatever you want. But Herod, Jesus looked at that temple and he was not impressed by the building. Because he came to bring God's presence into the lives of people. And he would die for that.
Yes.
And when he died, the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies is ripped open. And God invites relationship with people. And we move on into the New Testament, and you quoted from Corinthians, where we are called to be, where we're told, do you not know that you are the temple of the Holy Spirit? And Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 of us gather together in His name, His presence is where? In the midst of us.
Yes.
And remember way back at Mount Sinai, God's presence came down like what on top of the mountain? Fire. And after Jesus finished His work, He ascended to the Father, and He returned in the presence of His Holy Spirit, and He descended on His believers in Jerusalem like what?
Tongues of fire.
Tongues of fire. And we were given this treasure in clay jars, somebody said tonight. Okay? Do you get it? From the beginning, God says, here's the guardrails of how to live. And then Jesus says, now I'm going to make it three-dimensional. I'm going to deal with what's inward. Because in John's Gospel, in the upper room, He said, I'm going away, but I have been with you, and the Holy Spirit has been with you, and He will be in you. In other words, it's my Spirit coming back to dwell inside of you. Because you're not going to deal with stone tablets written in stone. You're going to deal with an internal guidance system that I'm going to write on your heart. In the presence of my Spirit. You're not only going to need the guardrails to keep you, but you're going to have an internal guidance system to keep you well between the guardrails. That all sounds really good, but there's a third guardrail that we dealt with this morning. It's the whole book of Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus, the first half of the book of Leviticus, is all about the sacrifices that need to be made. Because the bottom line is, a holy God whose presence consumes and destroys the presence of sin wanted relationship and connection with people who were bound to sin. That's illustrated as God begins to lay this all out, and He takes Aaron and his 4 sons and He turns them into the first priesthood, and He tells them how to come into God's presence, and 2 of the 4 sons decide that they're going to do it their own way, and the holiness of God's fire destroys them. So how do unholy people like you and me live in the presence of God? God gives them, in Leviticus 16, He gives them the Day of Atonement. The day that symbolizes this. And, the Hebrews talks about without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. And the whole thing is sacrifices. And Aaron has to sacrifice a bull for his own sins and a ram for a burnt offering. And then he has to take 2 goats. And these 2 goats are going to be a symbol of atonement or forgiveness. A symbol of what God is going to do to allow unholy people like you and me to be in His presence. And He casts lots. It's kind of like throwing a dice. Odds or evens. Roll the dice, okay. You're the odd goat, you're the even goat. Now which do you want to be? The odd goat or the even goat? Which do you want to be, folks? Odd or even? Well, let's see. The odd goat. Let me tell you what's going to happen with the odd goat. He's going to go and he's going to be killed, and his blood is going to be a sacrifice for the atonement of the people. Any volunteers to be the odd goat? Okay, let me tell you what's going to happen with the even goat. The priest is going to stand here and he's going to confess every one of your sins while he holds his hands on the head of that goat. And then that goat is going to bear the weight of your sin and is going to be driven out into isolation in the wilderness where he is subject to whatever chooses to feed on him in the wilderness. I don't know. You want to go to A? Go B. Or even.
I just want to be a sheep.
And then comes Jesus. I'm a football fan and I'm not a Patriots fan. But people refer to Tom Brady as the GOAT, the greatest of all time. This past month, Kobe Bryant was killed in a tragic accident. And people in basketball terms debate whether Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or Kobe Bryant is the greatest of all time. I'm a hockey fan. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, and I'm still proud to admit it. Even after last night.
Too bad.
Jean Beliveau, Villefort, Maurice Richard, great players.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I might have to admit, there's someone else who's probably the greatest of all time. Probably Gretzky. When it comes to defensemen, Sir Savard, Guy Lapointe, Shea Weber, Doug Harvey, they were all great. But I may have to admit that maybe Bobby Orr was the greatest defenseman of all time. You know what? The real GOAT.
Yes.
The real greatest of all time is the one GOAT who was sacrificed to cover my sins.
Jesus.
And who also took the weight of my sins and carried them away.
Yes.
Because the greatest of all time is Jesus. And he was there from the beginning.
Yes.
When God gave us guardrails to control our behavior. Through to the point where he's given us his word and his spirit to move within us, to give us an internal guidance system. He was there from the beginning. When God said, I want to give you a structure because I want you to know that I'm present with you, to the point where he moved by the Spirit of Jesus Christ to create a place where his Spirit could dwell in us so that we could be his presence wherever we are. He's the greatest of all time because he's the one who encapsulates God's plan to allow an unholy me in all of my brokenness and my failings to be able to come, as the writer of Hebrews says, boldly
Yes.
into the presence of God. He was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace when they came out unsinged, because he wanted us to know that because of him we can stand in the presence of God's holy fire and be purified but not consumed. And the only thing that protects us, the only thing that allows that to happen, is the finished work of Jesus.
Amen.
That's right. Amen.
So that's a thumbnail sketch of where we've been. We're going to keep going, and maybe I'll get to share some more with you, but
That'd be awesome.
that is a powerful message.
Yes.
Because every step of the way in the Old Testament, Jesus is there. And God's plan is being revealed in picture after picture after picture until we get the full picture in Jesus.
Yes.
Bottom line, folks, can't do anything better. I can't do anything better than to set my life about the work of just helping people
Yes.
live in a relationship with Jesus so that they can love God, love their neighbors, and love themselves.
Yes.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Because apart from Jesus, I do not have the capacity to love God with everything I've got. Without Jesus, I don't have the capacity to love my neighbor. I'm a little too selfish for that. And without Jesus, when I get really honest and I look inside, I may not be too happy with the person I'm looking at. But with Jesus,
Yes.
and walking in a relationship with Him, I can love God with everything I've got. I can love my neighbors, even the one who somehow Friday night decided that since my door wasn't locked, it would be a good place to hide from the wind and to shuffle through stuff and look at stuff. I came up Saturday morning and called my wife and I said, before you left this morning, were you trying to find something in my car? She says, no. And I look around and, oh no. I look and there's tracks all through the snow in our yard that wasn't my tracks. I go around to the other side and the back door is still ajar a little bit and there's a cigarette butt there and I know my wife doesn't smoke. And I'm faced with a question. It was bitter cold Friday night here.
Yes.
And some poor wandering soul came up our street, I mean one side of the driveway, went all the way around my wife's vehicle and then all the way around mine, found the door, they got in. They rifled through some stuff, but they left all the money on the door. So they didn't steal anything much. And the human side of me, after I hung up with my wife, wanted to take the phone and make one more phone call. Who was I going to call?
Police.
Call the police. Why?
Because it could be still there. Beating us, beating her. Or
Yeah, or I could just want whoever did this to pay for it, right? What does Jesus say?
He was going on.
Walk your car.
You know, turn the other cheek. Put things back, see if the car will start. Yeah, everything's running. They didn't mess with anything. Close the doors. Learn the lesson to lock my car. And say, you know, my heart on this has to be, God, bless someone with a place to get out of that bitter wind Friday night. But I'm telling you, if it wasn't for Jesus, that wouldn't be my attitude. Simple, folks. He's there from the beginning. He's there in all the symbols. And He came to show us the presence of God in flesh and blood. And then He died and rose again to give you and I the privilege to be able to go boldly into the presence of a holy God without getting toasted. Isn't that awesome?
Amen. Hallelujah. Yes.
Let's pray together for a minute. Father, thank you for all that you've done for us in Jesus. Thank you for all that you showed us way back. 3,400, 3,500 years ago, when you began to call a people to live as a holy nation, as a holy, godly society. Thank you for inviting us to know Jesus and to continue to be your presence, your godly people, your priesthood of believers, your holy nation here on this earth. Lord, thank you for the covering of your blood and your forgiveness for all those times when we mess up. Most of all, thank you for the privilege of being able to go into your presence together. Father, if there's anybody here tonight who's still figuring out what it means to have a relationship with Jesus, I pray that they find the help that they need to be able to discover that relationship with you and walk with you. In Jesus' name.